So we'll do another commercial before the camera goes on. I mentioned some materials there. We interviewed him, and are we all set? Okay. So, well, I'll tell that story again. It was a good story, wasn't it? All right, for the whole world to hear. Sam lived in a condo in Waltham, not too far from here, and one day he told me that across the street was a member of the Celtics. He lived in the condo, and he didn't follow sports, but his last name was Williams. I remember he played for the Celtics for a few years, and he said, I said, well, you know, Sam, when his friends are over and his relatives, I know what he's telling them. Across the street from me is this famous author on education. He said that will be the day when that happens. Sam, I've got this. The Review of the News was a weekly publication that the Birch Society used to do. Did he have hair? No hair in this one either. But this was back in the 70s. I got a few of these copies, and I've got his newsletters and a lot of the books that he's published available, and some essay, Why America Still Has a Reading Problem. I think he gave me about 1,000 of these a few years ago, and we've been able to distribute them to people who need this information. I also have something else. There's an obscure writer by the name of John F. McMahon. No, you're not so obscure. But some of you remember the Insiders. It had about numerous, well, this was the very first one. And I get a batch of these too. It doesn't smell too musty, so I think I did pass the musty test, right? So I'm sure that Jack will be happy to autograph it. So again, donations only. Well, at this point, I'd like to invite Alex Newman. Now, this is my first time meeting. I picked him up at the airport yesterday, but when Sam a few weeks ago to call certain people to let them know about his condition, and I said, gee, I better call Alex. And I had his phone in the bank, because we've been in touch on various articles in different things. And Alex was saying, and he's never met Sam, even though he co-authored a book with him. And he was hoping to meet Sam sometime this summer. I said, you better get up here as soon as possible. So we brought him to see Sam, who again was in failing health. And it said, he's traveled all over the world and speaks a whole bunch of languages, but he's never been to this area. I says, well, we'd take you to Lexington Green. So yesterday we went to Lexington Green, and John McMahon, but that's why he was running a little late, took him to Concord. You couldn't get him away, he loved it so much. So, and Alex has been on hundreds of radio shows talking about his latest book, so their latest book. So Alex, would you come on up, and let's give him a nice warm hand too.
Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here, and it was an absolute honor to get to know Sam and to work with him, and finally to meet him yesterday for the first time in person. As you guys know, his health is failing, but it was such a privilege and such an honor to meet him and shake his hand. And I'll tell you guys a few stories about our work together, and then I'll tell you guys a little bit about the book that we did. Let me get this up here on the big screen. Let's see, the slideshow. Okay, so we're not going to use the slideshow too much, but I have a few things on there I wanted to show you guys. So the story of our collaboration together on this book started, I think, early in 2014. I got a call from the publisher, and they said, hey, Sam Blumenfeld, I know you write for the New American also, and I know you're interested in education, and Sam Blumenfeld is working on a book. Would you be interested in working on it with him? And I said, of course, sign me up. What do I need to do? And so that's how it began. Then Sam and I got to speak. We compared notes on education and his views, and obviously, you know, he's been in this for 50 years, so he knew mountains more than I could ever even, you know, begin to conceive of. But we decided we would work together, and that was an absolutely amazing experience. Talking to Sam on the phone is like, it's hard to describe. It's like infinite wisdom just, you know, pouring out of the phone. He knows about everything. It's just unbelievable how sharp he was, and at his age, and how much he knew and how much he cared. I was just so touched by his motivations, and how you know, all of this, it was so selfless. He could have done all kinds of things, but he dedicated himself to trying to save this country by trying to save the minds of the children. And I can't think of a more noble pursuit than that. And so really it was such an honor to work with him. And then Alpha Phonics too. Sam told me about it, and so I said, okay, I need to get a copy of that. And I used it to teach my oldest son how to read. He just turned 5 last month. And within 2 or 3 weeks, he could already read basic words using this. And he absolutely loves it. It's amazing. And when I told him I was going up to Boston to see Sam, he said, oh, Papa, tell Sam that I said thank you for the book and how much I love reading. Just totally on his own. And he made a little video for Sam to tell him thank you for writing the book and for teaching him how to read. And it was such a delight, and my son still loves it. He says, Papa, can we practice more reading? Can we practice more reading? He loves to do it. And there's none of the pictures, you know, the way that nowadays they teach how to read. It's got to be colorful and pictures and memorize words. There's none of that in here. But I know it works. I've proved that it works, and so I have so many others. And you know, there's children all across this country who have benefited more than we'll ever know, thanks to the work of Dr. Blumenfeld, of Sam. And one more thing, over the last few weeks since the book came out, I've been doing lots of radio interviews promoting the book. Sam has not been in great health, so most of the interviews and the talking and the TV things have been on me. And the response I've received, it has just been absolutely amazing. I get calls from radio hosts, and, oh my goodness, Sam has been such an inspiration. I got a call a few days ago from the head of the homeschools, the National Home Education Research Institute, and he said he had seen Sam speak when he was still in college, and he asked him afterwards, what should I do? You know, what should I do with my life? I'm in university, I'm studying, and Sam told him, get into writing so you can influence people, and get into education, because those are the most important things. And that's what he did. And so Sam has touched more lives than I think any of us, or even he, will ever know or will ever understand. But it was such an honor and a pleasure to work with him. And finally to meet him yesterday. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about the book that we wrote, Crimes of the Educators, right here. There's some copies in the back, and if those run out, I have some with me as well. Basically what we start with is outlining crimes that the education establishment has perpetrated. And a lot of people, when they first hear that, crimes, they say, oh, you must be using hyperbole. Not at all. These are actual crimes. We list 6 specific prosecutable crimes that, you know, regular citizens would be prosecuted for if they were engaged in these kinds of activities, and rightfully so. And we point out that, you know, this is what's going on in the school. And then the subheader, how utopians are using government schools to destroy America's children. And again, people think, wow, that's really strong language. But it's actually absolutely 100% accurate. The children are being destroyed by the government schools, by the education establishment, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And this is a crime. It's a crime against our nation. It's a crime against these individuals and our families and everything that's good. And you know, we have to expose this. If the country is going to be saved, it begins with education. The John Birch Society understands that. Education is the way to fix these problems. And really, it goes down to the very beginning. What they're doing in the government schools is preventing children from learning how to read. They're giving them lifelong reading disabilities. So even if they can kind of make their way through street signs, they're never going to enjoy reading enough to want to do it. So, you know, we can produce all the articles and all the papers and all the material in the world to educate people, but if they can't read it, it's not going to do any good. And so what Sam decided to dedicate his life to, I think, is maybe one of the most important things that anybody could ever do. And so talk a little bit about what's in the book. Obviously, I don't have much time, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything that's in the book. It's humongous. I mean, this is, you know, 50 years of Sam's research. We tried to condense it into a small book, which was, of course, very hard. We had to do a lot of cutting. We had to, you know, prioritize what was the most important. You know, what I want to do is explain, you know, where we came from and where we are, and then a little bit about what's in the book. And then I hope you guys will read the book. I hope if you enjoy it, if you think it's worthwhile, you'll share the information with others, because I think the information in this book has the capability of turning this country around. If people could understand what's going on with the education system, we could really turn the ship around. People could read, and once people can read, they can read their own history, they can read their Bibles, they can read everything that they want to read. They can acquire information and knowledge independently. They don't have to depend on the government schools. They don't have to depend on the establishment media that we know is not very truthful. And so really reading and education is key. So, we start in early America. I'm just going to skip through a lot of this because we don't have time to go through it. But John Adams, he said, a native of America who cannot read or write is as rare an appearance as a comet or an earthquake. So, back then, people could read pretty well, right? Literacy was very widespread. Jefferson bragged that American farmers were the only ones in the world who read Homer. Today, if you ask people about Homer, Homer who? Huh? So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, clearly we've fallen a long way, right? If we, so, and back then, everybody understood that you needed to be educated. Actually, here in Massachusetts, one of the first education laws ever passed here in these colonies, 1647, the Old Deluder Satan Act. And the idea was everybody needs to know how to read because everybody needs to know the scriptures, because if they don't know the scriptures, Satan's going to come around here and get up to mischief and mislead our people. And so, without a $1 trillion per year government school system, people still learned how to read, right? They learned from their parents, they learned from reverends, they learned from their communities, they learned from one-room schoolhouses where, young kids up to, 15, 16, whatever, would all study together. The older kids would help out with the younger kids, but we didn't have anything like what we have today. And again, it costs us more than $1 trillion a year nowadays in the United States on education. And so where are we today? How did we get from, an American who can't read is as rare as an earthquake or a comet to a country where, according to the federal government, they did a literacy survey in 1993. 55% of Americans back then in 1993 could barely read. The situation is probably even worse now. So these 55% of Americans read in the worst two levels of reading. So clearly we've fallen a long way. We're spending more and more money on government education, but we're getting dumber and dumber and dumber, and now we're at the point where we're graduating millions of people who can't even read their high school diplomas, much less their constitutions or their Declaration of Independence. So clearly we have a very serious problem. And Ronald Reagan put together a commission, the National Commission on Excellence in Education. They said if a foreign power had done this to us, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. And what Sam and I argue is that we should view it as an act of war. Just because it wasn't a foreign power that imposed this disaster on us doesn't mean it's any less of an act of war. And if you read John Dewey's writings, you see that his ultimate goal was transforming America, subverting our liberties, and turning America into a socialist utopia, and thereby overthrowing our system of government, our form of government, and our freedoms. And if foreigners had done that, we would say that's an act of war. And why is it less an act of war? Because it was done by somebody who was born here. Dumbing down the population of a country is a crime of immense proportions. So lots of statistics today just showing what a disaster education has become today. We're going down, further down, we're spending more and more money, and things don't seem to get any better. Horace Mann, I think a lot of you guys know him because somebody referenced him and everybody laughed, but Horace Mann, he's kind of the guy who brought what we understand today as government schools into this country. He went to Prussia, and he thought they had a great system over there, mandatory, compulsory government education for everybody, students segregated by ages, and really one of the main purposes was to train children in obedience to the state and so on. So he came back here, imported this into Massachusetts, and traveled the country and promoted this across the country. And then the architecture was there when John Dewey came on the scene around the year 1900. John Dewey, all he had to do was seize control of this architecture and use it, rather than its original purpose, to educate people, to dumb people down. He thought education would be good for equalizing people, instilling obedience and authority, and so on and so forth. And he was very successful in getting this model promoted nationwide. As most of you, probably all of you know, one of Sam's biggest, I think, contributions to this world and to the field of education is his exposure, his shining the light on this whole controversy of whole word versus phonics. And I had heard about this, many years ago, but I didn't realize what a serious issue this was. This was just, for me, an arcane debate. Okay, whole word, phonics, who knows, who cares? But what Sam has done in this book and in some of his previous books is show that the importance of this is just monumental, because basically the whole word method is used because it's not a proper way of teaching people to read. It produces lifelong reading disabilities, it produces dyslexia, and now modern brain scans can even show this. We talk about some of the studies that have been done, neuroscientists have looked at this, and what they've shown is that children who learn how to read using phonics, alpha phonics is an excellent way to do that, their brains work well. You can scan their brains, you can see that the left brain does what the left brain should do, the right brain does what the right brain should do, the connections between the two are seamless and they work perfectly. Then when you do the same kind of scan on a child who learned how to read using the whole word method, what you find is confusion, a lack of connections between the two hemispheres. One is trying to do the job of the other, and it's just all scrambled. And another thing that Sam has done is he's shown that this can actually be reversed. And I think that's really huge and hugely important, because this means that it's not a lost cause. Just because somebody was dumbed down in the government schools and taught to read the wrong way doesn't mean that it's a lost cause. Sam has actually helped people who learned how to read the wrong way learn how to read the correct way. And so it's a hard process, it's arduous, and it's actually, some of the people who have undergone it have described it as painful, because you're really rewiring your brain to learn how to read correctly. But once it's done, then suddenly a whole world opens up to people. They can read anything they want, they enjoy reading, and then the doors are open, the possibilities are endless. People can educate themselves, and obviously that is huge, and that's what we need in this country. We need people to educate themselves, or we're never going to get anywhere. And we can produce the materials, we can help them along the way, but people have to want to learn, and to do that they have to know how to read properly, and they have to enjoy reading. So let's see, we'll talk a little bit about John Dewey. We spend a good amount of time in the book talking about John Dewey. Essentially, he was a socialist and a humanist, and he was very proud of these things. It's not some kind of secret. His views were well known. He had a vision for the United States. He pointed to an 1888 novel by Edward Bellamy called Looking Backward, about a socialist America, a communist America in the year 2000. No private property, collectivism, everything for the common good. And we all know what politicians and swindlers mean when they say common good. So that's what John Dewey wanted for the United States. He knew this could never be accomplished as long as we were the most educated and the most literate people on earth. And so he set about to reverse that, to dumb down the population. We actually reprinted his outline for how to do that. It was important enough that Sam and I and the publisher all felt we should include it in here. So it's in the appendix. It's an essay that Dewey wrote in 1898 outlining the plan to dumb down America's students. It's called The Primary Education Fetish. And in there he says, hey, why are we worried so much about teaching little kids to read? Let's worry more about social activities and observing and mixing with the world, rather than this incessant focus on reading. And he also noted that we have to do this quietly, we have to do it slowly, change must come gradually, because if the public figures out, there's going to be a violent reaction, and it's going to jeopardize the success of our little project here. So he knew that reasonable people would look at this and be horrified. They would say absolutely, positively not. And so that's why it was a quiet process, it was a slow process. And of course he had a lot of help, right? John Dewey didn't act alone. He had millions of dollars from the Rockefellers at his disposal. The Rockefellers had a philanthropy. John D. Rockefeller was the General Education Board. They gave him millions of dollars to set up an experimental school, to promote this kind of nonsense into the teachers' colleges. And by strategically targeting the teachers' colleges, and of course the teachers' colleges were producing the teachers, it became a rather simple matter to take over the public school system. You get your people appointed superintendents and chiefs of education and so on. And so that was basically his plan to take over the schools, and he really succeeded wildly. Rudolf Flesch wrote this in, I think, 1955, and he blew the whistle on it all. I don't know that he understood the true nature and the extent of the conspiracy, but he exposed the fact that children were being prevented from learning how to read properly in the government school system, and he showed what to do about it. Teach children to read the proper way, the way that English has always been taught. We have a phonetic alphabet, so of course you learn that using phonics, not using whole word, where basically you look at a word as if it were a symbol, kind of like a Chinese character, and you associate that with a concept. That's just total quackery when it comes to to reading a phonetic alphabet. It doesn't make any sense. And John Dewey was not ignorant of this. The whole word method was known to be quackery. If you go all the way back to the beginning, it was developed by a well-intentioned reverend. He wanted to teach deaf children how to read, and that's wonderful. They couldn't hear sounds, and so he thought maybe if we teach them like this, they can learn to read, and that's wonderful. But they tried it out in the Boston schools on non-deaf children, and it was such a disaster that they yanked it after a few years. It was producing illiteracy and all kinds of horrors, and so they said, okay, we'll take that out. And Horace Mann actually was a big proponent of that, and then finally they yanked it out because it was such a disaster. So when John Dewey came along and started promoting this kind of quackery, he knew exactly what it was going to do. It wasn't a big national accident. It wasn't a well-intentioned mistake. It's clear that he had a deliberate agenda to destroy education in this country. So we also spent a good amount of time talking about behavioral psychology and its role in the schools, and humanism and evolution, and how these all contribute to the problems that we see all around us in society today. I mean, if we look around, we can see that our society is falling apart. Abortions and crimes and riots, and nobody knows about the Constitution. The government's out of control. Really, if you trace it all back, this comes from the government schools. They're getting the kids at young ages, and so they have no idea. They don't know their history. They don't know their culture. They don't know even what they're losing. They don't even know how to read. And so, the root of so much of this goes back to the schools. We talk a little bit about the Department of Education, the disaster that it has been on in terms of proper education in this country and our schools. We do a little bit of background on the run-up to Common Core. Now, one of the things I want to talk about today, I know I'm almost running out of time here, but Common Core, I think, presents us with a huge opportunity to expose all of this. So Common Core has produced a rebellion in this country. I think that it is maybe unprecedented when it comes to the field of education. It doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative or libertarian or socialist or teachers union. Everybody is mad about this, except the establishment, except the politicians. So this is, I think, an unprecedented opportunity for us to blow the lid off all of this. People are mad about Common Core. They need to understand that Common Core was not the beginning. It's certainly not the end. It's part of a longer-term plan. So if we can get people to lift the veil, to look at what's going on here, we have a huge opportunity to really make some serious impact on education. And if we can impact education, impact the minds of the children, we can actually make a big contribution to fixing so many of the problems that we see today in politics and culture and in everything else. So Common Core obviously is a project of the insiders. I don't need to tell you guys that. The evidence is 100% clear. It's not even hidden. Achieve Inc., for example, a shadowy nonprofit that was responsible really for designing the Common Core. This is insiders all over the place, led by Bilderbergers, Council on Foreign Relations members, top to bottom. It's like they're not even bothering to hide it anymore. But just to give you guys a very quick idea of how bad Common Core is, and it's like a smoking gun at this point. They put together a rubber stamp committee. The Common Core people did, the Common Core Validation Committee, and the members of this committee have described it as a rubber stamp committee. It's not my opinion. And presumably they put people on there who they thought would just rubber stamp the standards. They put 2 subject matter experts, and only 2. One of them was Dr. Sandra Stotsky. I've spoken with her. I've interviewed her for some articles and for some other things. And she was the English expert, and she said, no way, these standards are terrible. I'm not signing off on them. You're stripping out all the good literature, all the good reading. You're replacing it with executive orders and EPA regulations. And this is going to reduce the critical thinking skills of children. So I'm not signing off on this. What did they do? They erased her name from the committee. They said, oh, she never existed. If you look on the Common Core's website, she's not there. Then the other expert in mathematics, Dr. James Milgram of Stanford, he also said, I'm not signing off on this monstrosity, the only math expert on this committee. And he said, no, I'm not signing off on this. The standards are poor, they're not clear, and get this, some of them are based on incorrect math. And so, why would you roll out incorrect math standards across the entire country without testing them unless your objective was to dumb down the children? And I submit to you that that is the objective. Again, so this gives us a great opportunity as Birchers, as Americans, to blow the lid off of this whole agenda to dumb down our children. Everybody's upset about Common Core. We just need to get them to see the big picture. It's not about Common Core, it's about an agenda to dumb down our children, and Common Core is just, the latest manifestation of that. We close the book by talking a little bit about UNESCO and where this is all going. People don't realize Common Core is not happening in a vacuum. This is not just a nationalization of education. This is a globalization of education. And again, the evidence is clear. You don't have to speculate, you don't have to theorize, you don't have to assume. It's all there. Bill Gates, the primary financier of Common Core, he put $2 to $6 billion of his own money into this, buying off the think tanks, buying off the unions, buying off the politicians to promote and to develop this Common Core. He signed an agreement with UNESCO in 2004 to develop global education systems and technology and master curriculums and so on and so forth. He signed it on behalf of Microsoft personally. You can get the documents with his signature on it. Now UNESCO, for those of you who don't know the history of it, it was established for the purpose of creating a global society, a global government based on humanism. John Dewey, of course, was one of the original humanists. He signed the first Humanist Manifesto. And just to give you guys an idea of the conflict between the humanist worldview and maybe the Christian worldview, the American worldview, whatever, the very first plank of the Humanist Manifesto, we believe the universe is eternally self-existing. It was not created. What are the first words of the Bible? In the beginning, God created. So right there, right off the bat, they're telling you we're undermining the authority of Scripture with the very first plank of our agenda. And so, of course, UNESCO was led by Julian Huxley, the very first chairman of this. He was a self-declared humanist. He wanted to use humanism to create a global humanist society that would be prepared for a global government. Now, UNESCO, a lot of people don't realize this, but you can go on their website and find these standards. They have what's called a World Core curriculum, and this was developed quite a while ago. The man who developed them, Under Secretary General Robert Mueller, he was a disciple of Alice Bailey. I don't know how many of you guys know Alice Bailey, but she was hugely influential, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, now called the Lucis Trust. But she wrote a lot of things. She claimed that these spirits, she called them ascended masters, would come into her and dictate to her what she would write. She wrote a book, Education in the New Age, and basically she wanted to promote a single global religion under a single global government. And so the guy who wrote the World Core curriculum that he said needed to be taught in every school on the planet, he was a disciple of this woman, and he was also very open about his views. He thought the UN was the supreme divine institution that was going to lead humanity towards this wonderful evolution of global government and brotherhood and all this kind of stuff. Now, we recognize this as quackery, but we need to expose all of these things, because I think any reasonable parent, liberal, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter, would be very alarmed by these things and would be encouraged to go research a little bit further. And again, this is a huge opportunity for us. Now, UNESCO, speaking of UNESCO, our current education secretary, Arne Duncan, he's a huge fan of UNESCO, and he doesn't hide this at all. He calls UNESCO his global partner in the cradle-to-career education reform agenda. So they're using our tax dollars to promote this lunacy all over the world. UNESCO is doing the same. They have global sexual education guidelines where you teach 5-year-olds. I'm not even going to explain, what they're teaching, because it's just too pornographic for this kind of setting. But they want to start sexualizing the children at 5 and even before, all the way through 18. Of course, Planned Parenthood is a big champion of the national sexual education standards, and the agenda here is extremely, extremely sinister. Also, UNESCO is promoting the Teacher's Guide for Teaching Reading, and I bet none of you will be surprised to learn that the primary emphasis is on the whole word, the sight method, and then they add the word phonics in there. They say first teach them with the whole word, you teach them to recognize words and memorize words as if they're symbols, and then you can throw in a sprinkling of phonics so that maybe they don't look like total imbeciles when they read a word completely wrong. But so that's what UNESCO is up to. Arne Duncan says he's creating green global citizens for the green jobs of the coming green sustainable world order. UNESCO says the same, and they're very open about it now. UNESCO is now bragging that when they started their Education for All initiative, there was only 3 countries in the world that had national standards. UNESCO wants every country to have national standards based on their global standards. Now, just a few weeks ago, they released a report saying, hooray, we did such a good job. Now there's more than 100 countries with national education standards and national testing regimes to go with those standards. And surprise, that's what we have here with Common Core and the federally funded Common Core testing regime. So that brings us to the end of the book. Future. Are we going to move toward liberty, educational liberty, proper methods of instruction, local control of schools, private schools, Christian schools, homeschooling, or are we going to move toward global standards, global tyranny? And really that's up to all of us. That's up to, how much work we're willing to put into exposing this and dealing with this. If we do nothing, I'm quite sure that we're going to be moving toward the UNESCO's vision of this. If we all get busy and get the word out, and people understand what's going on here, I think we have a very real chance of fixing it. And again, Sam's work, I think, might be the key to winning here. If people learn how to read, they can educate themselves. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. As long as the government schools are allowed to continue dumbing down the students, to continue making sure that they can't read properly, we can produce all the materials and send all the emails and all the Facebook stuff in the world. It's not going to make any difference. We need children to learn how to read properly, and then we can get about fixing this country. And this is a cheap tool for anybody to use. It doesn't matter if you're 4 years old. It doesn't matter if you're 20. You can teach yourself how to read, or you can work with your children and teach them how to read. So all Americans right now are paying attention to the education system. Common Core is such a disaster. It's new. Everybody is paying attention to what's going on at the schools. Let's expand the discussion. Let's get the discussion beyond the Common Core and show what the real agenda is here. Then we can get to the work of abolishing the Department of Education, reforming or maybe even getting rid of the education model that we have today, and and moving toward an era of educational freedom in which children can use what works and can try out different methods, and we can all be properly educated so that we can save this country and save this republic. Yeah, so if people want a copy of the book, you can. There's again some back there. I have some if those run out, and obviously you can get them through Amazon or whatever. I know Sam and I would both appreciate if you guys enjoy the book, if you would review them on Amazon. Apparently those are really influential. So if you read the book, if you like it, put a note up there so that other people understand that there's valuable information in here. And that's all I have. So thanks very much, guys, for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Art. That was great. One day, Sam and I are driving around. I don't forget whatever was taken to whatever